Now that we've heard the nuts and bolts of the basic income pilot from former Senator Hugh Segal, let's debate the merits of Ontario's going down this path. Joining us to put the basic income pilot under the microscope, Elizabeth Mulholland. She's CEO of Prosper Canada, a charity focused on poverty alleviation policy. Jenny Byrne, former national campaign manager for the Conservative Party of Canada, now Vice President, Bayfield Strategy. Sheila Reguer, chair of the Basic Income Canada Network, and Deb Hutton, former senior advisor to Premiers Mike Harris and Ernie Eves, and we're happy to have everybody around our table to continue the conversation about the basic income plan. Let me make all of you headline writers to start off with, and we're going to go around the table. If you were writing the headline to describe how you feel about what the province intends to do on the basic income pilot, Deb Hutton, what does your headline read?
A simpler, better path to poverty reduction.
Okay.
I would say poor, overstretched Ontarians given false hope with an economically unsustainable program.
I'm sensing a divergence of opinion. Go ahead.
Basic income, the solution for what's coming.
The solution for what's coming. Okay. And Sheila?
I would say paradigm shift in income security.
Let's follow up on that. What does that mean? Because paradigm shift is not something you see in headlines too often.
I think the underpinning of a basic income is just so fundamentally different than the structure with which we think about welfare and social assistance and other kinds of income security too that have all been, most of the rest of our income security system is based on having a job most of your life and having a good job that's going to provide you with benefits and things. So our systems are structured that way. And they also seem to depend on this idea that you're deserving or undeserving, that people who end up in poverty have done something themselves to cause that. And I think with a basic income, it's a recognition that we all have common needs in society. We all have common vulnerabilities. Things can happen to any of us. And we need to recognize that in policy.
Deb, the thing I found interesting about the piece you just wrote not too long ago was that on the one hand, you were saying you like the idea of a basic income, as your headline suggested, but you had a lot of concerns about what the current provincial government had in mind in terms of unrolling it. Express that a bit, if you would.
So the reason I think a basic income is both a small c conservative-based principle, and the reason I like it is twofold. First, it should be the most simple form of getting a form of social assistance to help those people who truly need it without spending massive amounts of money on the system and on civil servants. So dollars actually getting to the people who need help.
So you like the simplicity
And I like that. And I think from that simplicity comes things like transparency for taxpayers. I think it's more difficult to defraud the system, some of the things that a lot of us are challenged in when it comes to social assistance.
What concern did you have about the way the Wynne government's rolling it out?
So for starters, they did not take, and to their credit, Hugh Segal recommended this, so they followed Mr. Segal's recommendations. They didn't replace the basket of social assistance programs that we have with a single basic income. They did replace only Ontario Works and the Ontario Disability Support Program. Everything else is in place. So, and it's a pilot project, so I understand that it's more difficult to do, but you don't have any savings when it comes to the size and cost of the civil service to administer the programs. So I have a huge problem with that. The second reason I really like basic income is that it, I believe, does encourage people to get off social assistance and get back to work. And that should, in my view, be the goal of any social assistance or welfare program that we have, that it's a temporary program to allow people to get into the job market or return to the job market and become self-sufficient.
We're going to unpack that idea more as we go along. Liz, what do you like about what the province is attempting to do here?
I think it actually sets us up for the labor market that we're already in and the one that's coming, which we've seen that almost 40% of Canadians have precarious incomes right up the income scale. And that volatility is negatively impacting their ability to save, to plan financially, and it's causing them to go into debt. So having a basic income, particularly for the low and modest, will help those who are affected most by that to actually improve their financial stability and outcomes. I also like, for all the reasons that Deb and Sheila have outlined, the restoring dignity to people, moving away from policing. It's more efficient. It'll be more effective at helping those who can work. to contribute to society, or those who can't to perhaps volunteer or to spend time caregiving, which is a really growing need. But most importantly, I think we're looking at a huge shift in our labor market with automation and the rise of artificial intelligence. And experts are now predicting that we may lose anywhere between 30 to 45, 48% of the jobs that now exist. So if we're entering into a world where we're having entire categories of jobs disappearing and we don't have an adjustment plan for people, then the basic income makes a lot of sense as the first line of defense against really a breakdown in social cohesion and the ability of people to make ends meet.
You're the hard sell here, apparently.
Well, listen, I completely agree. I think that where this program is good, that it does not penalize people that want to go out and get a job or get a second job. I know 70% of people that are considered living in poverty in Ontario actually are working already. So I think this is good. The issue that I have with this is it's a pilot project, and one of the areas is actually my home area of Lindsay, Ontario, which will be starting in the fall. Is that there is not actually money for this program. Ontario is in debt, and there is, right now, with taking the pilot model, if you take the pilot model, it will cost $15 billion a year if we were to actually extend it, according to Kevin Milligan, who's an economist at the University of British Columbia. He was using Stats Canada data. So I think that this is doing now is it's simply just a pilot project, and I think it's giving false hope to people that this is actually going to end up being economically sustainable in the future. And as for jobs, part of the issue we have with jobs is hydro rates, is high taxes. 2,000 small businesses and companies moved out of Ontario last year. So people that want to have a job, the jobs aren't there because they're actually leaving because of the economic climate of this province.
We should just clarify the Milligan figure of, what was it, 15, 16 billion, something
Yes.
like that? That's that's the Cadillac program all in, covering everybody. At the moment, it's a $50 million pilot program, and then 3 years, let's see how it goes. Do you have any objection to sort of checking out and seeing how it goes?
Well, I think we obviously are, into a pilot project. I don't think anyone is going to actually stop it. So we should see how it goes. But economically, it doesn't appear that it's going to be sustainable.
Here's what the public, listen, for what it's worth, we'll just pass this along. Ipsos did a survey on all this. Ontarians asked if the government should pay all residents in a country a basic income in the form of free and unconditional money in addition to any other income. And that's what they came up with. 41% agreed with that notion, 34% disagreed, 25% didn't seem to have an opinion about this. So there seems to be, I guess, by a fairly small margin, some agreement that this is something we ought to try. Sheila, I want to find out from you, I have heard the concerns that this is going to create it's a new big government program designed to create more government bureaucracy, which is the last thing anybody wants to see. How do we make sure that doesn't happen?
Okay, I just saw this question actually, and aside from the results, which I don't really want to comment on, but the question is an odd one, but very important. It presumes that question a certain design, and that design is not what Ontario's piloting. So this presumes a universal basic income in the form of a kind of demogrant that everybody would get, regardless of any other income. What Hugh Segal has recommended and Ontario's piloting is based on a refundable tax credit model, where those who need it the most get it. So you're talking very different things. And, as we were talking earlier, both the devil and the angel are in the details. So that survey I find a little bit odd. I think what it highlights, though, and it highlights the importance of a pilot in ways that are beyond the test itself. And that's that it's given legitimacy to an issue that we all really need to talk about much more. And it shows that people do need to understand it better, do need to be more engaged with what's going on, so that informed decisions can be made when election time rolls around and we decide where this goes after the pilot or what happens elsewhere. The federal government is looking at a national poverty reduction strategy. Most people think that the federal government should be the one doing a basic income when we roll it out.
We don't even have to go that far. Hugh Segal told us 40 years ago, Jenny, that the Ontario government of the day decided it wanted to do something about seniors' poverty, and they came up with a guaranteed annual income for seniors, and it essentially eliminated 95% of seniors' poverty in the province of Ontario. If that approach made sense 40 years ago to do and worked, How come you're not sold on a similar approach for 18 to 65 today?
Well, and I think that's why we have to see what's going on with what happens with the pilot project here. So I think that in terms of watching the pilot project, what Ontarians are going to be looking at is, will this actually drive people out of poverty? Are they going to actually be using their money, using the $16,000 or the $24,000 if you're a couple, and actually going out and finding meaningful work and making yourself happy and bringing yourself up? I know there have been studies that, to your point, that single parents who have found themselves with more income spend it on accommodations and food and are generally have less depression issues than single parents that do not have that opportunity. So I think that this is where the pilot project this is where we have to actually watch where the pilot project is going. But I also think that in terms of that where Ontarians are going to be looking is, how big is the bureaucracy going to be? What social programs, to Deb's point, are still going to actually be paid for? Because I don't think taxpayers want to fit the bill for both.
Can I just understand your position a little better? You don't mind if the basic annual income were to, for example, replace welfare and disability support, but you think it also ought to replace all of those other basket of programs as well?
I think a good percentage of them. In my world, all of them. Because I think that's why I support the concept of a basic income. This is what we provide our citizens, whether they're working, whether they're currently on social assistance, and we make sure that this level of an income floor that we collectively set, no one falls below that, period. Right now, we know we spend $9 billion in Ontario for just Ontario Works and ODSP, the Disability Support Program. That's just the main program, and that is what this pilot is replacing, $9 billion. But I don't believe we know everything else that we're spending to support folks who can't pay their hydro bill, to support our students, there's a whole whack
Myriad
of programs.
Yeah.
And, well-meaning governments add and add and add. Nobody ever takes away. So I like this program if you take them all away and you put in a basic income.
Can I just take issue with that?
Speak to that, Liz?
Yeah. One of the things, this whole approach relies on people being able to tax file successfully. Right. That is the gateway to whether you include all the bucket of things that Deb is talking about, or it's simply just the income support piece. But the reality is, we've been doing research on access to tax filing and people claiming their benefits. And there's as much as $1 billion in unclaimed benefits because people experience really steep barriers to actually tax filing. We do have free community tax clinics in some communities. We don't have them everywhere. The program that does exist, supported by the Canada Revenue Agency, doesn't support tax filing for self-employed people, people who want to backfile for missed years, people who have complex tax situations. Many newcomers have tax involvement with their former country.
That is very
pensions.
much against the conventional wisdom out there. You think there's $1 billion not tapped
child
into?
tax benefit on reserve alone, $340 billion is the estimate, based on 30 to 40% of First Nations families on reserve are not tax filing. So that's just for the Canada Child Benefit. Then you add in things like the working income tax benefit, the HST credit, GIS, OAS. 10% of low-income seniors not getting their guaranteed income supplement.
All right. Could you then, Sheila, speak to Deb's point, which is that this ought to be replacing all of the benefits out there as opposed to just two?
So yes, I don't think I would go that route. However, it raises an important point that there are lots of things that we just don't know now, because we have been adding and finding this maze of solutions to a problem that is income. So if income is the problem, then you address income. What we do is provide people with insufficient income, and then you get poor health. So then you need more clinics, you need more access to hospitals. Then you get people living in unsafe environments, and you get more accidents and injuries, and more crime. And so we've developed this downstream maze of things that's preventable.
Whereas you should be having if it's an income problem, fix it upstream with more income.
That's right. And only when we do that will we find out how much of the explosion in mental illness, for example, is due to poverty, insecurity, economic anxiety. So I don't think we're going to abolish those other things, but I think the need for them is going to shrink a lot, and we'll find out what they really are.
But there's no guarantee that they will shrink. So right now, it's what we're asking taxpayers to look at is there's a basic income. All the social programs stay in place. It's just basically throwing money at what isn't actually going to help people. People's hydro bills aren't going to come down. There's not going to be more jobs created with high corporate and business taxes and continued red tape. So all we're doing is throwing money at it, and we're just going to then have to keep going back to the well and throwing more money at it when it becomes not enough.
But if it's an income problem, she says throwing is not the word you'd use, I'm sure, but presumably, all right, go ahead, Liz.
I think there's actually a very strong case that every study that's ever been done shows a correlation between poverty and ill health, and that when incomes go up, ill health declines. Healthcare is the single greatest provincial cost. It's 38% of Ontario's budget the last time I looked. It may be higher now. So I think we can pretty much conclude that if you did have a basic income, that there would be some impact and improved health. And we're working with doctors to test that. And I'm sure other people are looking at that too. And I think I agree with Sheila, just our experience working closely with community partners who support low-income people, newcomers, people with disabilities, et cetera, would argue that there is a correlation. But I don't think we should take anybody's word for it. I agree. Taxpayers need to know, citizens need to know that we're working with evidence, and that the pilot will do is show us whether there are indeed savings that can be had in other areas and other program areas as a result of this investment. And I think we can also look at other jurisdictions too. We can't do a one-to-one correlation between their environment and ours, but it can be instructive at where we might look for savings and opportunities or unintended consequences, which are also a risk with any new program. So,
Jenny, let me put the questions that Hugh Siegel asks in his report, which he answers a particular way, as we heard in the interview, and I want to hear what you think. You know, the question, would a basic income reduce poverty more effectively? He says yes. Would it encourage work? He says yes. Would it reduce stigmatization? Because no one wants to be on welfare and have their neighbors know. He says yes. Would it produce better health outcomes and better life chances for recipients? He says yes. Do you have any reason to answer no to any of those?
No.
So you're sort of on side then.
I am actually on side with the basic premise. Milton Friedman was an American economist who touted this in the 70s. But his version was, you know, limit no social programs, school vouchers. I'm not saying go that far, but if you actually took what his study was and added inflation, people would be getting a $50,000 to $60,000 a year basic income. So I am not actually against the concept. What I'm against is that if this government is actually just using this for political reasons leading into an election, and they actually have no intentions, because financially it's not sustainable to be able to actually bring it in under the model that this pilot is under.
Let me follow up on that. Do you think that the reason they're bringing this pilot plan in right now is simply to get votes, and that there's nothing more to it than that?
I think it's a big factor in it.
It's a big factor, of course, but you know, everything with a year to go to election, there's, you know,
yes,
it's got capital B politics attached to it.
Yes.
But do you doubt their bona fides on this?
I think let's see what the pilot project is. I will give Kathleen Wynne the benefit of the doubt, but I think there's been a lot of announcements that have been made over the last 6 months that are thinking more to June of next year than they actually are in 3 years into a pilot project.
Deb?
Yeah, and just to reinforce Jenny's skepticism, when they announced this, which was one of the reasons I have a problem, I like basic income, but have a problem with the Wynne government's approach. They announced it, and they said they were going to begin consultations with First Nations communities. So if a basic income program is meant to be simple and basic and, you know, one size fits all for everyone, that seems a little counter right out of the gate. And it says to me, this is part of their political partisan approach.
But I think there are constitutional reasons for that. I mean, the structure of First Nations people and the tax system is very different.
provinces don't run the welfare on the reserves.
But they're going beyond that. Yeah. They're looking at, you know, consulting with First Nations to see if there is a better program that works for them. And either we're going to do a basic income, whether it's provincially or nationally, or we're not.
Can I just say on that one, because we work with First Nations communities and implementing programs that we've tried elsewhere and that work very well in other types of communities, there is a completely different reality on reserve. There is different capacity to deliver. They don't have NGOs. They don't have The services that do exist are often overtaxed. So we've been working trying to set up financial coaching, tax clinics, financial education, and it's been an uphill battle, not because there's any lack of desire or passion or commitment or desire to see these services available to their communities, but they simply don't have the capacity to add them on to what's already on their plate. So I think it's completely sensible in very practical reasons to spend time with First Nations to figure out how would we build this into your world, because the systems operate differently than in the rest of the province. I don't think it's pandering or kind of adding a whole new thing. I think it's really just about making sure we do it right so that we're not wasting people's time and money.
Okay. Sheila, let me try this with you because I want to go back 30 years. And I do remember when the government of Ontario in that day, led by David Peterson, decided in the middle of a booming economy to increase welfare rates significantly because they thought that was a great way to make a dent in poverty. And what they discovered was, despite the fact that the economy was going gangbusters, the numbers of people on welfare and claiming welfare went through the roof. And it was, I guess in the view of many at the time, a cautionary tale about the advisability of, in the words of some critics back then, just giving away money for nothing. What's the lesson in all of that we need to understand for today?
So for me, the lesson in that is, what is the goal of your actual project and what is it doing? Welfare is designed to fail fundamentally. It penalizes people, it restricts them, it has so many conditions. Everybody focuses on the rates and how much people, that is only part of the story. The larger part is how restricting it is for people, how demeaning, how difficult it is once you're forced into that situation to get back out and do something. It doesn't do the kind of income smoothing. It chops your life up and makes it much harder.
Which is why you prefer the basic income.
Which is why I prefer the basic income. And if I can just offer a comment too on the sort of Ontario and the political situation, I mean, our network is Canada-wide. We're an international affiliate, and we're nonpartisan. So, the political timing of Ontario, I don't know. But this is not just about Ontario. This is worldwide. It's happening everywhere. And the same reasons for it are coming up over and over again. It's traditional, historic inability to really deal with poverty. It's artificial intelligence and the robots are coming. It's gender equality and the fact that care work has never been well remunerated and valued in our society. And now that everybody's out in the workforce, everybody's anxious, everybody's insecure. These things are international drivers of a new economy.
Did Switzerland not have a referendum on this last year at this very time? And
yes.
it failed tremendously.
They rejected it.
A lot of the people involved in that were actually quite happy. They were surprised that it got as much support as it did because, again, the details, the model they were proposing was a very universal one that everybody would get it. It was extraordinarily generous. So to get the level of support they did for something like that is amazing. To do something more modest the way it's being proposed in Ontario. And the other thing I want to highlight too is that Canada has the best existing system of refundable tax credits already. We know how to do this. We have the machinery in place. So that's an advantage for us too.
We have, forgive me, Liz, I want to get a clip in here because there was, there are critics to this and they sometimes show up in funny places. This is Nikki Ashton, who's running for the leadership of the federal New Democratic Party right now, who in a recent debate criticized the guaranteed annual income. Let's hear some of that. Go ahead, Sharon, roll that clip.
I think there's some major red flags. One is that there are many people on the right that are big fans of basic annual income, like Kathleen Wynne, a liberal, but very much on putting forward a fiscal right policy, and I would say others, including conservatives, that put it forward. I'm also concerned that it doesn't get at the systemic issues that push precarious work. A key priority needs to be expanding our social safety net. I mean, that's where true universality can be seen when we expand healthcare, pharmacare, dental care, here. You know, one of the things that many people talk about is the need to lift everybody up, but recognizing that we're not all living in the same kind of situation. While I think that you've put forward an important sentiment, our campaign believes that expanding the social safety net is the way to go forward.
Now, there's some interesting stuff there, starting with, if you're for it, she must be against it. So that's, I find that interesting. But she does raise a lot of other issues about, why, in her view, if you want to alleviate poverty, this is just not the way to go. Do you want to speak to some of her concerns?
Sure. I think basic income is not a magic bullet. There are no magic bullets in solving a problem as complex as poverty. So I think we really need to understand, and I think one of the things I would say in support of the Wynne government is that they're not just looking at basic income, they're also looking at employment standards, how they address precarious work, stuff. So they are taking a more comprehensive approach.
So this is a piece of the puzzle.
You can disagree with, where they're going or not, but I think they are trying to look at this as a much more comprehensive across the board look. And the role doesn't stop with the government. I think communities have to look at their role, employers have to look at their role, and that we need to all be looking at this together and having these kind of conversations across sectors about what kind of country do we want, what do we expect as a basic floor for our citizens. And the reality is we have basic income for seniors. We now have basic income for families with children through the child benefits that we have through a combination of federal and provincial child benefits. So really what we're talking about is the last group, which are people who are single adults and people with disabilities who are single adults.
There was another, and I want Jenny to speak to this. There was another interesting group criticizing the basic income pilot, and this was the Public Service Employees Union of Ontario, which is concerned that if this does go through, and if it is as streamlined, as simple and transparent as people say it will be, there will be public servants who will lose their jobs. And obviously that is of concern to the union representing public servants. What do you think of that argument?
They'll lose their jobs in terms of the bureaucracy and processing?
Yes.
Well, listen, I think that the bureaucracy is very large. I think that if that's the reason that that the union is against the basic minimum income, it's no different than Nikki Ashton saying she doesn't support it because Deb Hutton does. So that's a very political comment to make. I guess that's what I'm going to say.
What do you think of Opsu's argument?
I'm still reeling from the fact that Kathleen Wynne's on the right of the spectrum. So I'm a little speechless. Well, I mean, when I saw Opsu's response, I said, right on, because that means this is a simpler, less complex, less bureaucratic, and therefore more money going to the people who need it kind of system. And that's one of the reasons I support it.
So that's something you two can agree on, but interestingly enough, not the Public Service Employees Union, who disagrees.
I predict, though, at the end of this pilot, we will find that there is more than enough work for the public service in terms of the administration of this project. That I'm making that prediction right here.
And I
Boldly.
think it won't be so much for the administration of the program, but the ability for those people who have been hired to do social services and social work to actually do it properly. I've talked to some of these people, and they themselves, asked each other, do you do casework? Like, do you actually get to do real casework that helps people who really need it the most, who have multiple issues and things?
And what's the answer?
And they all went, of course not. Nobody has time for that. They're all policing money. So you need to really divorce those things. You need to separate the money and the services, and then you look at how you do services better. There's a really good report that's come out of Metro Hall in Toronto, looking at the way you redesign services for a basic income world, for a new economy, looking at the issues that you're dealing with now, once the income problem has a resolution.
Hugh Siegel seemed to be quite adamant on the following point, that we are very good at tracking through Statistics Canada and any other number of tracking agencies, addiction rates, mental health rates, poverty rates, wage rates, etc. And he felt very confident that within 3 years' time, we are going to know whether or not all of that stuff is reduced. And in his view, obviously, the basic income would be the reason why it happened. Are you that confident that we're going to know that much in just 3 years' time?
I think you'd have to look at the actual data sets and your ability to establish a causal relationship, which you may be able to see associations that can be explored further. My caution would be against relying on sort of aggregate, high-level, province-wide statistics without actually adding some qualitative research to that to understand the actual dynamics and decision-making in households that can help explain some of those correlations that you're seeing. We see that in the financial lives of people. If we look at national aggregate statistics, it tells us one story, but when we actually look at behind people's doors and into their actual bank accounts, their financial lives, we see a very different story, which is what prompted the TD Bank to do that survey on income volatility. And it was shocking. Here was a national bank that did not know that 40% of its customers had income swings of 25% or more month to month that were impeding their ability to manage their finances. And neither did the federal government know that. So those aggregate statistics tell us one story, but we need to complement that with other more in-depth qualitative ethnographic observational research. And then I think we'll get the full story about what's really happening and to what degree the basic income is or is not contributing to these types of improvements that the aggregate statistics may point to.
I'm down to my last couple of minutes, and I want to ask the two people who have a lot of experience in capital P politics at this table. You have it in small p politics. They have it in capital P. You having advised premiers, you having advised a former prime minister. Listen, no one knows today. We're 51 and a half weeks away from the next election, but it's possible Patrick Brown, the Conservative leader in Ontario, will be the next Premier of Ontario. It's possible. If you were sitting down to brief him on what he ought to do on this file, what would you tell him to do?
Well, the short answer is let the pilot run its course. I don't think any of the three leaders should not see that happen. I mean, it would be, I think, a really big shame if it were to have started and not finish. Hugh Siegel, in his report, made a comment about, or had a passage about the fact that even though we as partisans think that our policies are wildly different than our opponents, we generally have been on what he called path dependence, which is that we're on, I think he even says, the same furrow, that we sort of head down the same path, and some of us may go right, some of us may go left, some of us may go faster, but we've all been down the same path. And that basic income is a brand new path. And so I think to finish to answer your question better in terms of what he would do ultimately after the pilot project's done, I think it's time for us to embark on a new path. And I think it's possible to do it as a conservative, as a liberal, and as a social democrat, to actually, I'm hoping it would look pretty similar, but to say this is a new way of addressing poverty, of addressing social assistance in our province.
Last minute to you. What would you advise?
I agree with Deb. I would keep I think that the pilot project should run its course. I think that then when the data is in, I think that I would sit down and ask some very tough questions to the bureaucracy to find out if this model worked, if it didn't, and what the next steps forward are.
Do you think, I don't mean this to be a smart aleck question, but if you asked the bureaucracy that question, are you confident you'd get an honest answer?
Not always.
In which case, what do you do? That's when you have to
push. That's when you have to ask the tough questions and look at the information yourself.
But at the moment, just to extend your metaphor here, it sounds like the four of you are on that path. There are just maybe some differences of opinion about whether to turn right or turn left or how fast forward you want to go on the path. But we seem to have consensus that this is an idea whose time has come. Am I saying too much here?
No. I think that's accurate. I think we need to accept that we're all learning and that this will be a journey of discovery and that everybody has something to learn along this path and that we need to be open to that.
Ladies and gentlemen, my work here is done. I want to thank Elizabeth Mulholland, the CEO from Prosper Canada, and Sheila Reguer, the chair of the Basic Income Canada Network, for being on the program tonight. And on the other side of the table, Jenny Byrne, the VP for Bayfield Strategy, Deb Hutton, former senior advisor to Premiers Harris and Eves. Great to have all four of you on for our discussion on the Basic Income Pilot here on TVO tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.